I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. Even as gas prices are hitting record highs, Canadians are fanning out across the country for fresh travel experiences after 2 years of bottled up demand. The head of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada says some vacationers are still staying closer to home on camping, hiking, and cycling excursions, while others opt for road trips over pricey plane tickets. This comes as fuel costs and inflation loom larger. Well, with the weather only expected to get better as we get closer to a busy season, how can Canadians enjoy the summer without breaking the bank on fuel? The Canadian Automobile Association's Teresa DeFelice joins us now to give us some advice for boosting your mileage and saving cash at the pumps. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
So we know Canadians really want to get out there and enjoy the summer months, but with these gas prices hitting record highs, how can they save money on fuel during long road trips?
Well, there's a couple of things that you can do with inside your vehicle and around your vehicle that might be able to just help create better fuel efficiency while driving your vehicle. And this can go from habits like how you brake and how you get going again from when you're stopped at a light or whatnot, to thinking about not idling. There's so many tips, so I'm happy to delve into them.
Yes, definitely. Let's talk a little bit more about the advice when it comes to braking and starting your car, especially at stoplights.
Yeah, so what we recommend is kind of go slow into both the brake or as you're coming out of being stopped, and just to be easy on both the gas and the brake pedal. The further back that you can brake instead of slamming on those brakes, the more fuel efficient and less emissions that is how your car will react. And same with sort of that get to the go start, right? If you can ease into it, anticipate the light's going to change, but obviously be safe. That little habit of just your own behavior within, your car driving makes a big difference.
And what about on highways, on those really long road trips? Are there kind of steps that Canadians can take to save on gas in that scenario?
Yes. I mean, we recommend, speeding is a bit of a challenge because you're on the highway and you obviously want to go the speed limit. And many people tend to go a little bit over the speed limit. But your vehicle actually tops up in terms of fuel efficiency between 80 and 90 kilometers an hour. So the more that you go over 90 kilometers an hour, the more that you are going to use up in fuel. And so our recommendation is obviously watch your speed, try and stay at or below the speed limit as much as possible. If the conditions are safe, it's not raining hard or anything like that, get into the habit of using cruise control. You'd be surprised at how that car's ability to keep that steady pace will actually feel quite nice and not this need for speed. We're in our cars too. They're so comfortable. We almost don't always recognize the speeds that we're going at. But if you can keep your speed pretty reasonable, use your cruise control so that you're not sort of revving up or winding down, that will help with the fuel efficiency.
And meanwhile, as it warms up outside, we know Canadians are going to start using their air conditioners. So how can they save on gas-fueled air conditioning?
Yeah, so one of the things that we recommend at CAA is, don't run your car, don't idle. And part of that is we tend to do that, especially now with the hot weather. Your car's been sitting for a while. You want to get that air conditioning on and going. Our recommendation is for you to put your windows down to sort of push that hot air out. And if you can, for sort of lower speed driving, like city driving, try and use your windows as down. It makes sense to use your air conditioning to keep cool. And another aspect of, even if you are using them in the city or on the highway, some cars have come equipped with a max AC function. Try not to use your max AC function. Try to go a few temperature degrees below what your car would automatically set the temperature at. And this will actually help you as well, because air conditioning can impact your fuel efficiency. Some experts say up to 20%.
Some important information there. Now, just about a minute left here, Ms. DeFelice, but what other steps can Canadians take to save fuel in their tanks?
Well, especially if you're doing road trips, make sure you've had your car looked at and you're doing your car maintenance. We had not done a lot of driving over the winter. People are anxious to get going out and about. So get those oil changes and have those filters changed if you haven't done so. Checking your tire pressure, get into the habit of checking your tire pressure once a month, because overinflated and underinflated are not good and for your car safety and on gas as well.
Some great advice. Thank you again for joining us, Ms. DeFelice.
Take care.
All right, up next, we take a look at the impact of climate change in Canada and how the insurance industry is reacting to it. We'll have a conversation with the Insurance Bureau of Canada's Craig Stewart up next, so stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at this important and challenging topic for Canadians. Stay with us. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault has launched the final development phase for the national strategy on adapting to climate change. Experts say Canada needs to do more to prepare infrastructure for the threats of extreme weather and get faster at helping Canadians recover from floods, fires, and other major storms. The plan is supposed to show how Canada can become more resilient to the effects of climate change, and it'll include a national monitoring and evaluation system. This while the Insurance Bureau of Canada says Canada must respond by adapting to keep citizens and communities out of harm's way and by reducing their carbon footprint. Well, with us now to discuss the national climate change strategy from an insurance perspective is Mr. Craig Stewart, Vice President of Climate Change and Federal Issues at IBC. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Great to be here. Thanks, Nima.
So how much money do climate-related disasters actually cost the federal and provincial governments each year?
Well, the numbers have kept going up and up and up. So in 2015, the numbers were more around $1 billion a year. But last year alone, the floods that occurred in November in British Columbia are expected to cost about $5 billion in uninsured losses. And then with regards to insured losses, of course, those numbers make the total even higher.
And what about individual Canadians and businesses? What does it cost them?
So for Canadians right now, many Canadians actually shoulder the cost of climate change through their taxes, through their insurance policies, and they get directly hit because, frankly, insurance doesn't cover the most frequent events, which are flood events. And so a lot of Canadians end up paying, unfortunately, out of pocket. So overall, it's costing us all, whether you're in private business, you're a government agency, or you're just an individual that owns a home.
So everyone's being impacted. Now, in terms of the insurance industry in particular, how have these climate events impacted insurance?
So globally, these events have been on the rise, both in terms of the number of severe events that we've been seeing year in and year out, and in the total cost. Back in about 20 years ago, these costs were about $400 million a year. Each and every year, we're looking at about $2 billion in insured losses on an annualized basis. And we just expect the numbers to go up from here.
Some very shocking numbers there. Now, we know IBC says Canada should respond by keeping citizens and communities out of harm's way. So how can officials go about doing that?
Well, what we'd like to see is essentially targeted action to try to remove, or help protect those Canadians that we know are living in undefended areas across the country. So, for example, those that are living in boreal forest who are at high risk of wildfires, particularly in British Columbia, year in and year out. Those that live on floodplains, where we know they're going to flood. Some of them have a 5% chance of flooding in any given year. With those folks, we actually know what to do. Whether it's to reduce vegetation close to a house in a boreal community, putting fire impervious shingles on the roof. Or in a floodplain, if you're living in a floodplain, either, frankly, relocating people who shouldn't be there in the first place, elevating homes, changing the landscaping so the water is going to drain away from the house. There's a lot that we can do, but it takes investment. And that's what we're calling on governments to do, in partnership with municipalities and homeowners.
And the responsibility to adapt to this climate change is not only falling on federal officials or provincial officials, it also falls on businesses and individual communities working together in this fight. So what steps can both industries and citizens take?
So the private sector can do a lot. So, insurance companies obviously play a role in educating homeowners and businesses that they insure about the risk that they face. We can also provide premium incentives to, just as we do with fire, to reward individuals for taking those steps to protect themselves. Banks can be doing more in terms of mortgage incentives. Realtors can be doing more as far as disclosing the risk of a home when in a real estate transaction. We need to become innovative. There's a lot that frankly, the private sector can be doing. And then for consumers, it's about educating themselves, getting a sense of, are they at risk? Are they not? Consulting municipal maps online, talking to their insurer, getting detail to understand better the degree of risk that they might face and the steps that they can take to protect themselves.
A very informative conversation, sir. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you very much, Nima, for having me.
A look at intergenerational trauma from a residential school survivor's perspective. We'll have a conversation with Mr. Bruce Allen up next. Stay tuned. On the anniversary of the tragic Kamloops 215 discovery, we want to address the long-term impacts for residential school survivors and their families. It's been a year of reckoning for the country since a First Nation announced ground-penetrating radar had located 215 suspected unmarked grave sites at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in BC. And it's estimated that 150,000 First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children attended residential schools, which were part of Canada from 1831 to 1996. Mr. Bruce Allen was one of the students who attended Lejac Residential School near Fraser Lake, BC. He is also an intergenerational survivor through his grandmother and father, who attended Lejac as well. He currently works as a resolution health support worker at the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. Mr. Allen joins us now. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Good afternoon.
Now, some have said the discovery of these graves have led to survivors pursuing a deeper sense of healing. So what does that look like for you and your community, sir?
For me, it was the survivors who didn't participate in the initial compensation processes that started in 2005 or 6 and continued on till 2013. A lot of survivors didn't participate in that, and when Kamloops happened, they were reminded how bad their experiences were, and they had to start talking about it. So on the ground right away, survivors are, though they've never talked about it before, are starting to share their horrific stories, and just generally the survivors are telling their truths. Those truths have to do with how the school has affected their lives. Even today, their children and their grandchildren are affected by their own experiences, and some of them are just sharing those experiences for the first time. And so that's the healing part, I believe, is because they've never told anyone.
Hearing these stories, it's incredibly heartbreaking. In this segment, we really wanted to highlight the long-term impacts of the residential school system, sir. So we know you were at Lejac Residential School for 7 years. How has your own personal experience shaped your life up until now?
Well, I would say it started with a therapist, an Indigenous therapist, talking to me about residential schools and put me on the path of healing, where I was able to not only work with survivors, but also to bring them out to a place of healing, which means that I had to also make that journey myself. And it's a long healing journey, and it continues today. And many of our survivors are on that same path. So I participated with elders, with therapists, counselors, workshops, conferences, culture camps, elders gatherings, and so all of these things contributed to healing. And I think when we continue to do that and tell our stories, a lot of our people will begin their healing again. And the Kamloops 215, the unmarked graves, really emphasized that we need to continue to work hard in our communities to heal those effects that are still happening today. and that shows up as overdoses that are happening in our communities with our young people, the suicides, the drug and alcohol deaths that are happening, and so we're still reeling from the effects of the residential school today. And so I'm doing my best. I did work on myself, so I'm doing my best to help out those survivors when they come to me.
A long journey ahead for many survivors, sir. A quick 30 seconds left in this interview. If you have any last messages for our viewers on this anniversary, what would it be?
I think as Canadians, we need to educate ourselves, learn more about what the residential schools were all about, as well as the Indian day schools. There's a deadline coming up pretty quick here, but yeah, just learning about the history and listen to the survivors tell their stories, find survivor stories to see what actually happened in this country.
Mr. Allen, thank you again for joining us today and sharing your story with our viewers.
You're welcome.
Up next, a look at Canada's proposed climate adaptation plan with Julius Lindsay from David Suzuki Foundation. Climate change continues to be a hot topic among officials as Canada prepares to launch its first ever national strategy to adapt to climate change. On Monday, the federal government launched a public engagement process to hear input from Canadians regarding how to prepare for climate-related disasters. Well, this comes as flash flooding from heavy rain last week, combined with melting snow, has overtopped roads and damaged bridges and culverts in western Manitoba. And flooding isn't the only concern. The federal government says it's preparing for what could be a challenging summer of wildfires in parts of the country, especially in BC. Well, joining us now to give us a deeper look at how climate change has impacted Canada is Mr. Julius Lindsay, the Director of Sustainable Communities at the David Suzuki Foundation. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we mentioned some of the climate-related weather disasters that are impacting Manitoba and BC, but what other provinces have been impacted by climate change so far?
I think it's clear to say at this point that all provinces are being affected by climate change, and some of the extreme weather that we're seeing in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and BC right now, we saw in Ontario, where I'm located, over the past few years, and there was also a very large flood in Alberta a number of years back, and so we see this pattern of these extreme weather events happening across the country.
And how have the federal and provincial governments responded to such disasters? I guess the bigger question here would be whether such responses were enough.
Well, I think the federal and provincial governments have responded by providing aid and providing funds, but really it's municipalities and the local communities that are the most affected and who have to shoulder some of the cost of the cleanup and the impacts from infrastructure. Municipalities in Canada own 60 to 70% of infrastructure, are responsible for it. So a lot of these impacts and effects are being paid for from municipalities fixing and addressing these challenges.
And throughout the years, as you mentioned, we've seen wildfires, floods, heat domes, a lot of things happening across the country. But what would you say is the biggest environmental threat to Canada so far?
Well, I think climate change in general is the biggest environmental threat to Canada, and as we've seen, these impacts continue to happen. The costs and the damages continue to grow over the years, and it's something that we really, as a country, have to address and contemplate how we are going to address these effects and try and adapt to some of these changes and some of these disasters that we've already seen and the ones that we will see in the future.
All right, Mr. Lindsay, what are you hoping will be covered in the federal climate change adaptation plan?
Well, I'm really hoping that there's going to be a very robust piece around data. We need to understand where these risks are, how they will happen, how likely they are to happen. And that's really starts with the data that we have that underpins how we look at climate change. The second, as I said earlier, is, climate change adaptation and impacts are really very locally focused. And so ways to connect with those local communities, ways to support those local communities in addressing climate change and adaptation in specifically, especially from our infrastructure perspective, is really something that I'm hoping to see in the plan. And I think the last piece that I'm really hoping to see in the plan is cross-country coordination. These impacts are very local and they happen differently in different places, but we need to be coordinated and ambitious in the way that we address climate change adaptation.
So what does an adaptation strategy mean for the overall fight to prevent further impacts from climate change?
Well, it really means it's about preparedness. There's a statistic that says that for every dollar we spend in preparation, we save $3 in terms of how much the impacts that we see. And so it's really about preparedness. It's really about understanding, as I said before, what those impacts are, where they might be, and then how we might address them. And that comes down to sort of very local level. It comes down to the various impacts that we might see, from flooding to heat to ice storms, and really understanding how that might affect the areas that we're in, and then building those strategies for how we can adapt to those changes that we're going to see in the future.
All right, Mr. Lindsay from the David Suzuki Foundation, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at important conversations from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. You could also watch all our news and commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. So stay tuned for other programs on our network. Thanks for joining us on the Forum Daily Week in Review, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great weekend, everyone.